Oh, my guest is here. Excellent. We are joined with the one, the only Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Other than some unforeseen and unexplainable technical problems, I'm alive. How the fuck are you?
I am doing fine. The other day my computer went through a reset just before I started the show, and I literally had to go to the whole other computer in order to get it to work. So I feel your pain on that one. I'm glad you could join me. You guys can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. All of his interviews end up on Boosty. He is fantastic in regards to his analysis of situations dealing with Ukraine, Russia, etc. Um, Mark, let's start with just a military assessment before getting to the national security strategy, because I do want to get your take on that. Contempt for Europe. I think I've called it contempt for Europe, reentrenchment, competition with China, and I guess a diversification of responsibility in regards to various places. But before we get to that, Bakrovsk has fallen. Leningrad is surrounded. The noose around Leningrad seems to be tightening. Volchansk has fallen. Um, there's mopping up operations taking place in Kupiansk. What is going on the battlefield? Give us a breakdown.
Okay, so there's two. Everything you've said so far is absolutely correct. Покrovsk has been under control for several weeks already. Whatever the Kiev regime may ridiculously claim as videos and geolocations clearly show us. In Kupiansk, the situation is a little bit more complicated. Russia completely took control of the city, except for some holdout forces within the city, and Russia announced that actually before Pokrovsk. But they completely surrounded the city, and there were some isolated forces. But in the last couple of days, the Kiev regime has just dug the bottom of the barrel, thrown in, freshly nabbed off the street conscripts, whatever they had left, and they are launching major counterattacks in Kupiansk area that are serious. They do threaten not to retake Kupiansk, but there is a possibility they're trying to break open the cauldron at one point to let those forces that are trapped within the city escape. I myself do not think they're going to be successful, but it's important to know what is really going on the battlefield as far as I'm concerned all the time. And because there is an ebb and a tide, it is still a conflict. There is a steamroller, but even a steamroller can face, things it can't pass temporarily and slowdowns. And the Kiev regime is simply throwing everything it has left at Kupiansk. At the same time, Russia is also gathering forces for two, possibly three new offensives, right? Almost certainly not all of them will be enacted, right? It depends on how the Kiev regime responds, where they send troops, where Russia sees the opportunities. But Russia is gathering forces for another major thrust in the northern Kharkov area, particularly the northeast Kharkov area. They're gathering forces to launch a assault at Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, specifically a new offensive force that will be dedicated to that. And there continues to be a Russian buildup in the north, in the very northwest of the contact line, in the Russian side, just opposite of Chernigov, which has not seen much conflict, certainly not since 2022. So that could be an attempt by Russia to force the Kiev regime to hold troops there so that they can't put them elsewhere, or to rush troops there. But if the Kiev regime doesn't respond, then it could very well turn into a real new offensive from that area. That's the way Russia is keeping the dynamics up. But I would say the new developments, I mean, the really fastest developments over the last few days have still been in the Zaporizhzhia region, where Russia, it just continues to take settlement after settlement. I don't even have times to learn the names of them all, much less people who are less familiar with Ukraine or Russia at this point. And the major settlement in the area, Russia has moved into Gulai Polya in the eastern Zaporizhzhia region much faster than was expected. They've already taken some 20% of the city, and they are still continuing wide flanking, the pinchers around the city to cut off the supply lines into it. And my understanding is that those have been very successful. That the Kiev regime forces in Gulai Polya are almost effectively in a cauldron at this point as well. And the Russian military forces in the area are demanding their surrender. They're leafleting them with their options and so forth. But they seem pretty confident that they've got those forces there in the bag. So at the same time, there were enormous Russian long-range strikes for 3 nights in a row. We've seen Russia doesn't put out, of course, the exact numbers of the drones and missiles that it uses in these strikes. We have to take that from the Kiev regime. They never have, right? But one of the attacks was in excess of 700 drones and missiles, according to the Kiev regime, and another of the attacks was in excess of 1,000 drones and missiles. And Russia's targeting their electrical infrastructure, their military industrial, also their train transport logistics in a major way that they haven't before, further west. And in particular, that the photos are out. The Kiev regime always tries to hide all of this damage as much as possible. They always try, there are laws out preventing it, but in particular, the Fastov railway station, an important junction outside of Kiev, was really hit hard. And normally, attacks on railroads can be repaired fairly quickly. That is why Russia has not gone after the railways on a national scale in this conflict, because it simply wasn't cost effective to do so. Both Russia and Ukraine, have the Soviet legacy. They are able to rebuild train infrastructure, right? Tracks, whatever's damaged very quickly. But the Kiev regime is now not as able to repair things as effectively as they have. And because most of the trains are run on electricity, that is doubling the problems, because now they're having the physical problems of destruction and the fact that they're not getting the electricity they need to run the trains. They've actually begun running old early Soviet era steam locomotives again, where they're able to get them operating, because they don't have the electricity to run the trains everywhere now. So Russia, with the Garans now being produced, probably at this point in excess of 1,000 a day, they have new opportunities to what they can do, and they can go after the railway infrastructure in a way that simply wasn't cost effective for the Kiev regime's repairability, like it is now. New opportunities are opening. So that's why I believe we're seeing the strikes like this that we haven't before. And another new development that has been reported on shall we say the outside, or not the center narrative of the Western media, is the new capabilities, the always continuing evolution of Russian combat systems. One of them is with the Garan drones, which have various iterations now. The Garan 2, the Garan 3 in a jet capability. Now the Garan, yeah, that's the steam locomotive. The Garan is now able to, it's been able for a couple months now to hit moving targets, right? So meaning it's controlled in real time. The Kiev regime has been using the F-16s and the Mirage 2000s that it got in a solely air defense capacity, right? Hiding them in West Ukraine and using them to hunt down drones and potentially cruise missiles when they attack. They're not hugely successful, but any success is better than none, is the argument. But now the Garans are turning the table on these aircraft and going after them in fighter mode. Two different capacities. One, they can now, particularly with the Garan 3 with the jets, they can go kamikaze after the aircraft. Another capability is there now evidence, and the Kiev regime has admitted this, that Russia is equipping the Garans with air-to-air missiles. So they're effectively now small fighters as well, drone fighters, and they can go after the aircraft. So these are all new continuing evolution of Russia's weapon systems, making them far more dangerous. And again, they have different iterations. It's not like every Garan is capable of this, of different things. They're tailoring them now for specific capabilities and missions, and there's a very wide variety of what they're capable of at this moment. And there's just nothing equivalent on the other side. Why? Because NATO doesn't have anything equivalent in any type of serious production numbers to equip the Kiev regime with. So I always important to, I think, to keep up with the technological evolution on the battlefield. For one, because on both sides, even on the Kiev regime side, they're light years ahead of NATO in drone warfare, and that's modern warfare. I mean, that's the situation. We also, of course, through the end of last week, we saw these new, well, not entirely new, but renewed Kiev regime attacks on civilian tankers and on civilian infrastructure in the Black Sea, including the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which Kazakhstan and the US are heavily invested in. There was one more attack in the last week on a tanker in the Black Sea, not transporting oil, but transporting sunflower oil. Again, this was off the Turkish coast in the Turkish exclusive economic zone. This was a Russian ship, and I believe it was the MiG Volga 2. I think that was the name. It was not hit by a surface drone. It was actually hit by UAVs, by air drones, air kamikaze drones. And it suffered some surface damage in 2 attacks, evidently. But neither one was enough to sink it, or it was able to get to port in Turkey, I believe, and will get whatever repairs it needs there. But we haven't seen another attack in, I want to say, 6 days now since then. Another such. Turkey was extremely upset about this. And I mean, there's already problems. The Financial Times reported this morning that insurance costs for all shipping of any countries in the Black Sea is up by 3 times now because of the new danger, the new potential danger. And Putin was quite clear. He says, we have options here. He says, one, we could choose the option that we could go quid pro quo after the shipping in the Black Sea of any country that is helping Ukraine, of any country doing trade with Ukraine. He says, we haven't done that. We've chosen not to do that. We could do that. Is that where you want to go down the path here? And he was clearly speaking not just to the Kiev regime there, but to the Europeans. And potentially the Americans. I think personally the British are the ones driving this whole thing on the Black Sea, and they always have before. Their Admiral Radican has bragged on the pages of the British newspapers how he's in charge of Ukraine's winning strategy on the Black Sea, blah, blah, blah. So I can't imagine that has changed. So I would believe the British are ultimately behind all of this to a significant degree. Putin also said the other option is we can simply stop the Kiev regime's access to the sea, right? And we are willing to do that. And there's two different ways that could be done. One is short range, right, and one a long range. And it can really be done without putting Russian naval forces even at increased threat of surface drone attacks. One is to flood the port of Odessa with sea mines. Very easily done. Russia hasn't done it so far in this conflict. I have to wonder why, to be perfectly honest. I guess diplomatic reasons is one of them. But they're certainly easily capable of that. And that would present, of course, a huge problem for the West, because it has been using shipping in the Black Sea to get the majority of its weapons and ammunition, because it's always far more efficient to transport large amounts of military equipment and ammunition and everything by sea than it is by train from Europe on land. The other option, the long range option, is they seem to be giving Russia the perfect excuse for going after Odessa, taking Odessa permanently. Again, that's not an immediate possibility, but I mean, how can you say that Russia should, the arguments for taking Odessa just become more and more on the Russian side, and arguments against going to that extent, keep slipping by the wayside. So there is a renewed conflict in the Black Sea as well, but as always, it's a sideshow. Ultimately, the conflict is decided on the ground, right? And even the long-range strikes are significant, but long-range strikes after 3 years have not just completely destroyed the Kiev regime. They've certainly inhibited it. And likewise, the Kiev regime's, vaunted attacks on Russia's oil refineries have barely dented Russia's oil economy, despite claims to the otherwise. Reuters reported a couple weeks ago that Russia's refining production overall is only down 3% on a year. And as well, there was actually a report in the Moscow Times, which is not a Russian newspaper. It's a Dutch info warfare outlet. It had an office in Moscow years ago, but of course, all of that has been ended, since the beginning of the conflict. But the Moscow Times actually did a report. They did a survey, a very extensive survey, and their conclusions from this is all of this talk about a Russian gasoline crisis resulting from their attacks on the Kiev regime's, Western-assisted attacks on Russia's oil refineries caused some massive gasoline crisis where Russians were waiting in line for gasoline and there was a shortage and they were having to import from outside the country. All of it was 90% false and exaggeration. And what the real conclusion they came to is something that I and others suggested was, the majority of what was going on is all of this occurred. Most of these incidences that were reported, and they tried to present it as if it was nationwide. It wasn't. It was in the Russian south, right? It was in Crimea and on the Sochi coast, right? On the Black Sea, in Russia's subtropical climate, where Russians go on vacation every August. And this happened in August. And Russians hit the road, right? They're like Americans, on vacation season. Large numbers of them go on vacation, generally not always true anymore, but generally a more cost-effective way than taking on, an airline somewhere, domestic vacations. There's always a run on gasoline because there's so many people traveling by road and filling up their tanks in doing so. And that is actually, it turns out, even according to the survey, the majority of what that was. And what it wasn't, it was like small, mostly independent gas stations, really small ones, might have had a little bit difficulty, particularly in that season with distribution, on top of it. And some of those stations didn't have a supply of gasoline that was constant. And then the thing was, even if one of those smaller stations, there was almost no recorded incidences that they talked to people that they weren't able to simply go to another gas station and get gas. So there's all of that was noise. It was all propaganda and disinformation and exaggeration as a result of opium, right? Because that's what they want, those attacks, the effect they wanted them to have. But none of it was real. And now you don't have to take my word for it living in Moscow. You can take the Dutch-based, quote-unquote, Moscow Times, which has been forced to admit it didn't really happen. Like so much of this other noise in the war, about things that have happened and have turned out not to be true.